I now call upon John Holzman to introduce the speaker.
Thanks, Lawrence. It's my honor and my pleasure to introduce to you tonight's speaker, Joe Lieff. Ottawa-born Joe Lieff is the son of the late Bernard and Esther Lieff. He is the youngest of their 6 sons and 1 daughter. And his father, Bernard Lieff, taught at the Ottawa Vaad for over 35 years. As a youngster, Joe lived on McGee Street and then on Daly Avenue. He graduated from Lisgar Collegiate and then from Osgoode Hall Law School, where he received his law degree. Joe is married to Evelyn Subkoff, and they have 4 married children, Elisa, Norman, Susan, and Alan, and 8 grandchildren. Joe's varied interests and commitments have steered him to many important accomplishments. In his profession, Joe has enjoyed an illustrious career as a lawyer and a deputy judge for the Judicial District of Carleton County, now the Ontario Court General Division, from 1976 until the very recently. In his myriad communal activities, both in the Jewish and secular spheres, his accomplishments are significant. Joe's love of music became apparent at a young age when he started leading Friday night services at the student congregation of the Ottawa Vaad when he was a young boy. He has served as a member of the congregational choirs for a period of more than 40 years, starting with Cantor Dorskin at Agudath Achim in 1927, then with Cantor Rabin at Adath Yeshurun, and finally with Cantor Apteweiser at Agudath Israel. He was privileged to participate in the choir that performed in the formal dedication of the new Maziki Hadass synagogue. As an active member of Agudath Israel congregation, Mr. Lieff was a member of the board and the executive committee for 10 years and its president from 1975 to 77. He introduced a mixed choir for the first time in Ottawa during his first year in office. As an active member of the Ottawa Jewish Community Council, Mr. Lieff was an officer and member of the executive committee for a period of 10 years and was president from 1981 to 1983. It was during his term as president that the Jewish community entered into the purchase of the Broadview Avenue campus. I am very happy to present to you Mr. Joe Lieff.
I need a drink. Excuse me. You know, and I agreed to address you this evening. I wasn't sure what there was about our Vaad that Mitch Bellman wanted to talk about, or what we could cover in one evening. Then in our August 26th issue of the Jewish Bulletin, I read that I would be talking about the history of the Vaad and its impact on our community. That wasn't much help. Then in the next issue, I read that I would be telling interesting background tales of the history of the Vaad. Still no help. Then finally, in September newsletter from our Historical Society, I couldn't make any mistakes. I see that I'm to speak about the background of the Ottawa Vaad Ha Ir, and I think I can manage that in one evening. In the meantime, I was provided with a great deal of information about the Vaad's history, and I want to tell you where you can find it. In 1995, in order to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Vaad, our Jewish Bulletin published a series of 13 consecutive and wonderful articles by Cynthia Engel about the Vaad, and on which she must have done many, many hours of research. If you're interested, you can probably obtain copies from our archives, as I did. In her lead article, Cynthia makes reference to Moses Bilski, our first Jewish settler. There's a wonderful chapter in Lawrence Freeman's book, Don't Fall Off the Rocking Horse, about his grandfather Moses Bilski, which I believe is a must-read. It's available at the Greenberg Family Library. And I'll have more to say about the Freeman family and the wonderful work they did. I had to get those plugs in. Cynthia's articles basically cover the period from 1934, and I feel we should go back a little deeper to give us a better understanding of the players and some of the institutions which already were in existence. First of all, I thought you should know a little more about the Ottawa Talmud Torah and another group known as the Associated Synagogues, which was created for a specific purpose. The activities of the second group are covered in a small handwritten minute book, which our archivist thought I should read, which I believe is priceless. First, let's discuss the Ottawa Talmud Torah, which is located on George Street near Cumberland. Part of that site is now occupied by the Salvation Army. Prior to the Talmud Torah, each of the downtown synagogues had its own little cheder, usually in the vestry rooms of the synagogue and with its own rebbe, and each assumed responsibility for the education of its own children. We had 3 separate operations, and it became pretty obvious to our elders that a single school was a necessity. So sometime in the early 1920s, they acquired title to the former George Street Public School. They probably had a couple of dozen signatures from members of our community to guarantee the mortgage. This was an afternoon school, of course, which operated from 4 to 7, with time out around 5:30 to eat our jam and pretzel sandwiches. Subsequently, with a larger enrollment, the hours were changed and we had 2 shifts from 4 to 6 and from 6 to 8. I'll never forget the day in 1923. I won't tell you how old I was when I showed up for my first lesson. There were 3 elderly teachers with beautiful white beards and 2 young teachers with trim goatees. The first 3 were Mr. J. Zelakovitz, the patriarch of the Zelakovitz clan, Mr. Greenberg, who was father of Laz and Yale Greenberg, and Mr. Goldsmith. The 2 younger teachers were Eli Stolnimsky and his buddy, my father. They were the rebbes from our 4 synagogues. One of the perks of being a rebbe's son that we were not charged any fees. As a result, when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and we switched to a 2-shift system, my father thought it would be a good idea if I attended both shifts. So we got our money's worth for a short while. Mr. Moses Loeb was the chairman of the Talmud Torah board for many years, and Milt Schaefer's father was very active as well. But this was definitely a community effort. Little did Mr. Loeb know at the time that only 3 of his 6 sons were future presidents of the Vaad. He worked very hard to keep the school going, and David once told me how he would accompany his father on a Sunday morning to collect a few bucks to help pay the teachers their salaries. This was during the Depression years. but he was a hard guy to say no to. The Tamatora building wasn't just a school. It quickly became a communal school full of activities. There were 3 large and 2 small classrooms, an office, a large social hall with stage and kitchen. In fact, it became a community center. Dave Slover had a drama group. The Young Judeans were there. The Young Judean Orchestra was there. Renee Brith Ottawa Lodge was there. There were many junior organizations, AZA, the Heifers, the YPL. Some of you may remember the name. AZA Sunday tea dances. Name it, we had it. But there was no gymnasium. There was a fairly large schoolyard and access to a gym, for a fee, of course, at number 4 fire station across the street in Cumberland. So much for the Tamatora. Now let's get back to the organization known as the Associated Synagogues, which I have already mentioned was created for a specific purpose. This was the name eventually adopted. But they started out during the summer of 1931 as 3 select committees of Rideau, Murray, and James Street synagogues, whose sole purpose was to engage a rabbi. King Street Shul was not involved. It seems that nothing could be done without a meeting. And fortunately, they kept minutes of everything, which are the source of all my information. So eventually, on August 24th, 1932, a joint meeting of select committees was called, chaired by Solomon Copeland, who announced that Rabbi A.H. Friedman had accepted the offer to act as their spiritual leader for an annual salary of $2,500. And he called for nominations for officers of the Joint Select Committee. Some of you here will recognize these names. Proposed and elected unanimously were Tom Sachs, H. Silver, and S. Copeland from Rideau Street Shul, M. Lachovich, Max Drazen, and Oscar Pedagorski from Murray Street Shul, Adolf Sherman, J. Fogel, and A. Bookman, James Street Shul. The officers elected were Alex Betcherman, chairman, A. Sherman, treasurer, and Meyer Cohn, secretary. At still another meeting, they confirmed the name Associated Synagogues of Ottawa. And still later, at a meeting held November the 2nd, 1932, amongst other things, they confirmed the manner in which the deficit which they had incurred in the amount of $525 would be allotted to each congregation. That's like 2 tickets to a hockey game. But remember, this is in the height of the Great Depression. In the meantime, what's going on at King Street Shul? Apparently, they were having financial problems of their own. And at a wild congregational meeting held in May 1932, after very lengthy discussions, which even suggested that they mortgage the shul, the body adopted the board's recommendations that they reduce the rabbis' and cantors' salaries and dispense with the services of the choir. Rabbi Collins' salary of $4,000 was to be reduced to $2,500. At a meeting of the officers and Rabbi Collins about a month later, he turned their offer down. Subsequently, not to leave them in the lurch, he agreed to stay on for the ensuing high holy days, for which he received $330. It all sounds like peanuts today. The grade 2 clerk in the government of Canada at the time earned about $90 per month. The other 3 congregations, of course, knew what was going on. And in December of that year, the Associated Synagogues have a meeting to explore the possibility of getting together with King Street Shul under one spiritual leader. The secretary was instructed to communicate with them to see if they might be interested. After a few weeks, they were advised by King Street Shul that they had appointed a committee to meet with the association, which they did. Subsequently, they were advised by King Street Shul that, now I want you to listen to this, while they were not committing themselves to any definite proposals of amalgamation, nevertheless felt that such an amalgamation under one spiritual leader could result in great benefits to the entire Jewish community, and promised to take it up with their congregation as early as possible. Nothing happens easily. Negotiations continued for a couple of months. Then we have a special meeting of the association to announce that they had accepted King Street Shul's offer to contribute the sum of $750 as their share of the rabbi's fees for the 1-year period from September 133 to August 134. The rabbi's salary was the same, $2,500 per annum. Rideau Street would be paying $950, Murray Street $560, and James Street $210. Now we have all 4 synagogues operating under the same umbrella. So what's the next logical step? At a meeting held in August 1933, which actually was called for the specific performance of providing relief for the Jews of Germany, somehow someone brought up the question of forming a Vaad Ha Ir. After some discussion, it was moved by Casper Kaplan. I think he was the spoke, on the wheel, and seconded that the executives of the associated synagogues recommend to their congregations that a Vaad Ha Ir of 26 members be appointed by the congregations, with 8 from King Street Shul, 7 from Rideau Street, 6 from Murray, and 5 from James Street, to administer the various branches of Jewish activities in the city, principally kashrut, Jewish education, spiritual guidance, with power to act for the congregations on the advancement of Judaism in our city. It's not hard to see where they were coming from and what their values were. These, after all, are only recommendations to the congregations, not a fait accompli. What followed, there were a number of meetings held, and all in all, it's about 2 years of meetings later. On January 30th, 1934, at a special meeting of the Vaad Ha Kashrut to vote on the proposal, Casper Kaplan, who was both acting chairman of the Vaad Ha Kashrut and president of King Street Shul, presented the concept to the gathering. By then, King Street and Rideau Street congregations had given their unqualified approval. Murray Street had not yet had an opportunity to vote on the matter, and James Street had rejected the proposal outright. By February 25th, Murray Street wrote, and I'm using their language, "We have embraced the idea wholeheartedly." And James Street, after a little pressure had been brought to bear, capitulated on March the 18th. A preliminary organizational meeting followed a week later, wherein they created a board and appointed a steering committee, adopting the name, setting out the purposes of the body, its membership, including the requirements for membership, and obviously a lot of preliminary work had been done to pave the way. And on April 29, they held their first regular meeting in the vestry rooms of King Edward Avenue Synagogue. The executive officers, all elected by acclamation, were A.J. Freeman, President, Tom Sachs, Vice President, B. Pearl, Honorary Secretary, and L.H. Goldman, Secretary. The acclamation of A.J. Freeman was more than a happenstance. At the time, he had already been the president of King Street Shul for 25 years. He was the president of the Zionist Organization of Canada, a member of the Actions Committee of the World Zionist Organization, and a director and member of many other organizations, both Jewish and Gentile. I don't believe that the presidency of our Vaad Ha Ir offered many new challenges. He didn't really want the job. However, both Tom Sachs and Casper Kaplan were convinced that the only person for the job was A.J. Freeman, and that no other person would have the approval of the entire Jewish community. They were probably right. They both felt that a strong leader was needed to ensure the organization's success, and he was the man they had in mind. It was up to Kaplan to persuade his friend to take the job, and though he had brought up the subject repeatedly, he was getting nowhere. So they then decided to adopt a different approach. They decided to set up a meeting at Mr. Freeman's office, and present would be the presidents of the 4 synagogues and the highly respected Rabbi Friedman. After a marathon session, they must have convinced him that they really couldn't do it without him. He finally relented and said he would talk it over with Lily. They knew that they had their answer. He served with distinction for 10 years until June 4, 1944. He guided us during the formative years and set a solid foundation for our community. The Ottawa Jewish community today is considered to be well organized and reputed to be one of the best managed Jewish organizations in North America. However, as some of you may recall or may have heard, June the 4th, 1944 was a sad day in our history. On that date, Congregation Adath Jeshurun was honoring the memory of Reverend Jacob Mirsky, who had served the congregation for many years as the cantor. Mr. Freeman, who had been very close to Reverend Mirsky, had agreed to deliver the eulogy and unveil a tablet to his memory. Although his own health wasn't the best, he insisted on being there as promised. At the appropriate time, he walked up the steps to the Oren Kodesh. He delivered a short, moving tribute to his friend, unveiled the tablet, and returned to his seat. While the choir was singing the El Mole Rachamim, sitting on his seat surrounded by his family, he passed away in the congregation which he had served so well for 25 years. Unbelievable. At this point in time, discussions had already taken place with respect to the construction of the Beth Shalom Synagogue and the Jewish Community Center, and A.J. was the honorary chairman for the first fundraising campaign. Tom Sachs, who had been his VP during the entire 10 years, was acclaimed as the president and served for the next 4 years. Following the Sachs years, with his recommendation, the Constitution was amended, limiting the period of president to 2 years. And there have been 28 Vaad presidents installed since 1948. For the approximately 40 years following the birth of the Vaad, the president and officers of the Vaad were voted into office by the members of the Vaad, sort of from within. That worked when the community was smaller in numbers and in number of organizations and associations. In 1973, during Norm Zagerman's administration, the constitution of the Vaad was changed to allow the community to participate in the election of officers. In brief, it now provides that you have to be an adherent of the Jewish faith, residing in the community, who subscribes to the purposes of the council, 18 years of age or older, and a contributor in good standing during the current year to the United Jewish Appeal. In effect, this was a major change and has democratized the whole process. Since that time, during the nearly 30 years following, I can remember only one occasion when a nominee was opposed and an election was held. As I've mentioned already, including two ladies, there have been 28 presidents since Tom Sack's days, and Cynthia Engel has researched them all. You should really read her articles if you haven't already done so. I think I may have bored you with a lot of names and statistics, but we've really only scratched the surface. What I'd like to do now, if you'll bear with me, is speak of two of my favorite people. I think it was in the late 60s or early 70s I was on the Tomatora board with Gilbert Greenberg. I'm not sure what our official positions were at the time, but we had been appointed as a committee of two to make our pitch to the Vaad for funds, to cover our annual expenses. The meeting didn't last very long. When we had satisfied them that we were looking for $115,000 to cover our shortfall, they told us the most that they could give us was $105,000. And they wanted us to provide two campaigners from the Tomatora board in the upcoming annual campaign. Gilly did try to get a little more out of them, but I didn't even try. We both knew then that something had to be done to change the system. Then at the time I came on the Vaad executive, Gilly was the president. He was a man with a lot of ideas, but more importantly, he was a doer. A number of committees were functioning to meet with the beneficiary agencies and to help them present their budgets for the upcoming year, not after the funds had been spent, as was the practice. And we were to render our assistance where possible. As well, discussions were taking place about modifying the whole process to take advantage of those new computer systems for use by the Vaad, the UJA campaign, and particularly the cost of implementation. In addition to his work on the Vaad, he was one of the principal movers in the creation of the whole Hillel Lodge. He also helped launch the Ottawa Jewish Community Endowment and Bequest Foundation and was its first president. But most of all, he had a dream. His dream was to reunite the West End and downtown branches of Hillel Academy under a single roof and to provide the community with modern facilities in a brand new complex. And to that end, he commissioned a feasibility study and appointed a long-range planning committee to investigate and report its findings. In short, he set in motion the wheels for what you know today as the Broadview Campus Complex. And in his annual report to the community in 1979, he happily reported that plans to acquire a new school building were well underway. First, we had to find the right location. He passed away suddenly in 1980 at age 57. It was 4 years later at my final meeting of the Executive Committee of the Vaad as its president that I had the pleasure of signing the agreement which had been passed unanimously to purchase St. Joseph's High School located on the Broadview campus. Phase 1 of Gilly's dream was in progress. Unknowingly, Bess and Gilly had also provided us with a future campaign chairman to direct the campaign which would fill the rest of Gilly's dream. But that was yet to come. While Gilly was president, he and his executive officers were having preliminary discussions about the creation of a Distinguished Service Award, which in fact came into being during my term of office as president. It was in 1946, during Tom Sachs's tenure, that Alec Betcherman approached a young fellow called Hy Hotchberg about filling the dual positions of the Executive Secretary of the Vaad Ha Ir and Director of Camp B'nai B'rith. Hy, who was just 23 years of age and newly discharged from the Air Force, accepted the job, and the rest is history. For the next approximately 40 years, the Ottawa Jewish community was his life. As the community grew, so did he and his expertise. In 1951, his responsibilities were expanded to include the direction of the fundraising campaign for the three-stage construction of the downtown Chapel Street Synagogue and JCC complex. I don't know if he got a salary increase, but from 1951 to 1959, he was known as the executive director of the Vaad Synagogue and Community Center to keep in line with his expanded responsibilities. When that job was finished, from 1955 to 1976, he was the executive director of the Vaad. And finally, from 1976 to 1985, he became the executive vice president of the Vaad, a title well deserved. When he got around to me during the latter period, he was a consummate professional. During the almost 40 years that Hy was on the job, we came, we went, but he was the constant. All of us benefited from his advice, and he added a new dimension to the office. I remember particularly the work he put in to convince Canadian Jewish Congress that the Ottawa area should be recognized as a separate entity. Prior to that time, we were part of the territory which included Toronto. And I may be wrong, but I don't remember any Ottawa members on the executive committee. They called us when they needed something in Ottawa or when we were late with our dues. He introduced me to Congress executive meetings in Montreal and at national and international meetings to which Ottawa sent delegates. He was a well-known and respected participant, particularly by his counterparts in the profession. He led many missions to Israel, and Evelyn and I were fortunate to be on one of them. This was during the Chaim Bar Lev period, and we were looking forward to our stay in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, which was one of the highlights of the trip. We were looking forward to it until we were shown to our room. I think it had to be the worst room in the hotel, if not in Jerusalem. When we went to the desk to see if we could have it changed, we were told that because Bar Lev was there really wasn't another room to be had. Hy found out, told us not to worry. He would see what he could do, and he was as good as his word. We wound up in a lovely room, all the amenities, looking toward the old city. What a dummy I felt like when I found out a few days later that there really wasn't another room, and he had simply switched rooms with us. In 1985, Hy was the recipient of the Gilbert Greenberg Distinguished Service Award, unfortunately posthumously. Finally, I want to tell you that one of the early recipients of the Gilbert Greenberg Award was Tom Sachs. This was at the annual general meeting of the Vaad in 1983. Bess Greenberg made the presentation, and I, as the outgoing president, was presiding at the meeting, always in the right. I can tell you I was really delighted to get into that picture. Tom was only 90 years of age at the time, and I believe he passed away at age 106. In Tom's day, when the Vaad came into being, it consisted of 26 members representing 4 synagogues, all of them Orthodox. Today there are 120 members of the Board of Trustees, representing 45 agencies or associations, of which 20 are beneficiary agencies, all living in harmony, and we are still growing. Thank you.
Are there any questions of the speaker? Max?
Joe, you said there was first rabbi hired. Did he serve all 4 congregations?
He wasn't the first rabbi hired.
Did he serve all 4 congregations?
He started out serving 3. He was serving 3. He was engaged to serve 3, and they ran a deficit. And it was the 4th synagogue was King Edward Avenue, which brought them all together.
Any other questions?
Jerry?
Jerry?
I can hardly walk. Jerry was very, very helpful in computers. He spent many hours during those years helping us make the change, and I remember that very much.
Any other questions from the floor? Thank you, Joe. Sylvia Kirschman?
Thank you. Joe, don't go away.
We were neighbors on McGee Street.
On behalf of the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society, and on behalf of everyone here who was privileged to hear your information about the Ottawa Vaad Ha Ir, we all want to thank you for the research you did, for your diligent attention to detail, and the wonderful talk. You have brought out that we had many dedicated people over the past 70 years who helped develop our centralized Jewish community. Your personal comment and community involvement in so many ways is a reflection of how much you care about Ottawa and your hometown. We're very lucky to have you. I'd like to present this to you and thank you very much for continuing to give back. The record of your talk will also be available in perpetuity in the Ottawa Jewish Archives, so that future Ottawans will know more about the Ottawa Vaad Ha Ir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Just one note, remember our next meeting is Sunday, October the 20th, Ethel Taylor on the Billings Bridge. Bessie and Sam Greenberg family, thank you for coming. There are refreshments at the back of the hall. Anybody that wants their picture taken with Gedalia, stand in line here.